I still remember the moment the lawyer read my grandfather's will. The room was thick with silence, except for the sharp click of the paper as it was turned, and the soft murmur of the family's low voices. I had always felt like I was an afterthought in the family, but hearing those words confirmed something I had never truly admitted to myself. I was invisible. The lawyer paused, his glasses perched on the edge of his nose, before he continued reading the list of names. My name never came up. Not once. I glanced at my parents sitting proudly next to each other. My father, who had always held the family name like a title of honor, sat with his jaw set, while my mother's perfectly manicured hands rested on her lap. They weren't looking at me, they didn't need to. This was my moment to disappear. My sister, Isabel, was the one who inherited everything. Every possession of any value, every heirloom that had been passed down through generations. She got it all. As the lawyer read out the final part of the will, a strange sense of clarity washed over me. Grandpa's final wish had been clear. Isabel, the perfect child, had inherited everything. And there was nothing for me. Not even a token gesture. Just a cold acknowledgement that I wasn't a part of their legacy. But then the lawyer hesitated. He pulled out a crumpled envelope from a drawer. A letter from Grandpa. I held my breath as he read the words aloud. He was only halfway through when I heard my mother whisper under her breath, "This is just another one of his weird, sentimental letters." But Grandpa's letter wasn't sentimental. It was a message. And it was hidden. The words slowly sank in and I realized what this was. This wasn't just about inheritance. It wasn't about money or possessions, or any of the material things that had been so carefully orchestrated. It was about truth. Grandpa's letter was meant for me. I had never felt more out of place than in that moment. Isabel's smug smile seemed to grow as the lawyer continued reading, as though she had earned it all, as if this was simply the way things were supposed to be. The whole room buzzed with muted congratulations to her, but I could feel the sting of betrayal settling deep inside me. It wasn't just that Isabel inherited everything, it was the fact that I wasn't even considered. And yet, Grandpa's letter, the one he had hidden under my name, seemed to be the answer. It wasn't a letter of apology. It wasn't a letter of love. It was a letter of truth. And as the lawyer continued to read, I could feel the walls of my life, the ones I had built up, the ones that had shielded me from the harshness of reality, crumbling down. The letter began with a brief, almost cryptic message. To my beloved Evelyn, if you are reading this, then my time has passed. You've always been the one who kept your distance, the one who never asked for much. But there's a reason for that, something I never told you. It was never about Isabel. It was always about you. I felt my breath catch in my throat. Was this some sort of joke? Had Grandpa always known? My head swirled with confusion, but I couldn't focus. All I could think of was how I had been left in the shadows. My parents, who had always seen Isabel as the perfect child, the one who could do no wrong, had shown me nothing but neglect. All these years, I had believed they loved me, but their actions were now undeniable. But Grandpa's letter didn't just stop there. He continued, his words heavy with regret. I know this will come as a shock to you, but it's time you knew the truth. You've always been smarter, more capable, and more deserving than anyone realized. But you never asked for anything, Evelyn. And that was your mistake. I'm giving you this inheritance not because you needed it, but because you've always deserved it. It's your time now to take what's yours. There was more, but I couldn't focus on the rest of the letter. The truth I had spent so many years hiding from, was finally out. Grandpa knew about everything. He knew about the way my parents had pushed me aside, the way they'd always favored Isabel. And yet, he had left everything to me. He had seen what I could never see for myself. I sat there, barely able to move as the lawyer continued reading. My family didn't even seem to notice the shift in atmosphere. My mother's eyes were still glued to Isabel, beaming as though she had won a prize. My father, ever the stoic one, stared blankly ahead, unaware of the profound impact this letter would have on everything. I could feel the anger rising in me, but I held it back. This was no longer about emotions. This was about control. This was about taking what was mine. After the lawyer finished reading the letter, there was a long pause. He cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. There's more, he said almost reluctantly. A portion of your grandfather's estate will be given to Evelyn. It's not just material wealth but a trust set up in her name, something far more valuable than anything Isabel has received. I blinked. Did I hear that right? The lawyer repeated it, slower this time. I turned to look at Isabel. Her face had gone pale. This wasn't part of the plan. The air in the room had shifted. And as it shifted, I realized something. I wasn't just receiving what Grandpa had left. I was inheriting something far more powerful, the truth. As I left the reading that day, I could barely hold my composure. The truth had been laid bare, and I knew something had to change. It wasn't just about the money or the inheritance. It was about the control I had been denied for so long. My family, the very people who had dismissed me my whole life, had given me something they could never take back. The keys to my future. But I knew better than to act in haste. I wasn't going to confront them just yet. This was just the beginning. I had time now, and I would use it wisely. The days after the will reading were a blur of confusion and rising tension. On the surface, everything seemed normal. My parents continued their lives, Isabel continued to revel in the spotlight, but I could feel the undercurrent of something shifting. The inheritance was mine, but the more I thought about it, the more it became clear. This wasn't just about the money. It was about everything they had kept hidden from me. I had no intention of confronting them immediately. I needed to understand exactly what had happened, how and why I had been pushed aside for so long. I spent hours each day looking through the papers Grandpa had left me, piecing together his intentions. But there was more to it than that. I needed to understand the full scope of the betrayal. And the only way to do that was to observe. Isabel had always been the golden child, the one my parents had nurtured, invested in, and cherished. But now, with Grandpa's letter, things had changed. I didn't need to look at Isabel to know that she was already plotting her next move, already feeling the sting of losing everything she had worked so hard for. And yet, I wasn't done. The first few days after the will reading were spent in silence. I knew they were waiting for me to react, expecting me to show weakness or make an emotional outburst. But that was not who I was. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. Instead, I spent my time methodically preparing. I started by reviewing every document, every scrap of information I could find related to Grandpa's estate. It was as if his entire life had been put on paper for me to sift through. Trusts, assets, properties, and everything was laid out perfectly. He had always been a meticulous man, and that trait had passed down to me. What struck me the most, however, wasn't just the size of the estate. It was the fact that Grandpa had been so calculated in his decisions. The trust he set up for me wasn't just a collection of assets. It was a legacy, a chance for me to finally rise above the suffocating expectations my parents had placed on me. But there was more. I came across one final document that seemed almost hidden, tucked away behind all the formal paperwork. It was a letter Grandpa had written to a business partner years ago, one that I'd never heard my parents speak about. The letter was filled with details about a business venture that had fallen through, and it was clear from the tone that Grandpa had been disappointed. But what stood out wasn't just his disappointment, it was the fact that he had placed me in charge of the remaining shares. I sat back reading the letter again. Grandpa had done something incredible. Not only had he left me a substantial inheritance, but he had also put me in control of something he had once poured his heart into. This was the key. I wasn't just a passive recipient of his wealth, I was now part of his business legacy. The pieces were starting to fall into place. I spent the next few days gathering as much information as I could about the business. I contacted lawyers, old partners, and colleagues who had worked with Grandpa. They were more than willing to share details, some out of respect for Grandpa, others out of curiosity about my sudden involvement in the family's business. I carefully cultivated relationships with each person, speaking to them as if I were just another member of the family, eager to step into Grandpa's shoes. But as I gathered the pieces, I began to realize something disturbing. My parents had been involved in shady dealings. There had been money laundering, false claims made to investors, and questionable financial transactions that had been covered up under the guise of family business. My parents had, without a doubt, been hiding something far darker than I had ever imagined. I knew now that I couldn't confront them yet. I had to make sure everything was in place before I took my next step. I needed evidence, real evidence, of their deception. So, I started working with the few people who had been loyal to Grandpa's legacy, slowly building a network of trust. As the days passed, I could see that my parents had no idea what was happening. They believed I was still the same old Evelyn, the one they could push aside without a second thought. But they were wrong. This was no longer about me proving myself to them. This was about taking back what had been stolen from me and exposing them for who they truly were. And then, just when I thought I had everything in place, I received a call from an unexpected source. It was one of Grandpa's old business partners, a man named Richard Malone. He had been silent for years, never contacting me or my family, but today he had something to say. "I've been keeping an eye on things, Evelyn," he said, his voice low and steady. "I know what your parents have done, and I've kept quiet for far too long. I have everything you need to take them down. But be careful. They won't go down without a fight." I took a deep breath. This was it. I had the final pieces of the puzzle. I was ready. But I needed to move carefully. There was no room for mistakes. The moment I exposed them, everything would change. My parents would be desperate to keep their secrets safe, and I wasn't sure just how far they'd go to protect themselves. But I was ready. I had waited long enough. The moment had arrived. It felt almost surreal, as if I had been watching this play unfold from the sidelines, and now, finally, I was the one stepping onto the stage. I had the evidence. I had the witnesses. And more importantly, I had the strategy. My parents had never seen it coming. Their overconfidence was their undoing. Richard Malone's call had been the final push I needed. He had sent me files full of damning evidence about my parents' illegal activities, their manipulation of finances, and their lies to the people closest to them. It was all right there in black and white. If anyone looked closely, they'd see exactly what I saw. The betrayal, the greed, the control they had exercised over the business and over me. But what I had wasn't just a piece of information. It was a weapon. A weapon that could destroy everything they had worked for. I spent the next few days in seclusion, reviewing the documents one last time. Every word, every number, every misstep they had made. I knew I had to wait for the perfect moment. The last thing I wanted was for them to turn the tables on me. No. I was going to expose them when they least expected it, and I had to be sure that when the time came, there was no turning back. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. They had always been good at covering their tracks. They had the lawyers, the contacts, and the public image to protect them. I had nothing but the truth, and that, I knew, would be enough. The moment I had been waiting for came unexpectedly. One Sunday afternoon, I received an invitation from my parents to meet at their house. It seemed casual enough. No urgency, no specific topic discussed, just an offer to catch up. My first instinct was to ignore it, to stay hidden in my safe little world with Grandma. But then I realized something. They wanted to confront me. They knew I had the inheritance now. They knew things had changed. They were trying to control the narrative before I exposed them. I was ready. I knew exactly what I was going to say. And I knew they would underestimate me. When I arrived at their house, I was met with the typical facade. My father, sitting in his favorite armchair with a drink in his hand, the picture of calm authority. My mother was already standing, as always, in her immaculate outfit, as if to remind me that nothing had changed in her world. Isabel was nowhere to be seen, likely off somewhere, preparing for her next perfect venture, just like always. Evelyn, my mother greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I'm glad you could make it. We thought we should clear the air. I took a seat across from them, maintaining my composure. I could feel the tension in the room, but I was calm. This was no longer about seeking approval or asking questions. This was about exposing the truth. Clear the air. I repeated, raising an eyebrow. About what, exactly? My father, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. We know things have been difficult for you lately. We understand that you're upset. But it's time we discussed how things are going to be from now on. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table. I'm not upset, I said softly, my voice steady. I'm just trying to understand why I was never enough for you. That hit them harder than I had expected. My mother's eyes flickered with a hint of guilt, and my father looked away as though he could no longer meet my gaze. The silence stretched out. They were caught off guard. And in that moment, I knew I had them exactly where I wanted them. You know, it's interesting, I continued, watching the cracks start to appear. All this time, I believed that you were doing everything for Isabel's future. That you were sacrificing so much for her. But it turns out that was all a lie, wasn't it? My mother's face paled. What are you talking about? The truth, Mom, I said, my voice cold now. The truth you've been hiding for years. The truth that Grandpa knew, the truth that I now know. I pulled out the documents Richard had sent me, placing them carefully on the table. My parents exchanged a glance, one that showed they had no idea what was coming next. You've been using Isabel's future for your own financial gain, I said, watching their faces freeze. The business venture Grandpa once trusted you with, the accounts you manipulated, the money you funneled to cover up your lies, it's all here. My mother's hand shook slightly as she reached for the papers. My father stood up, his face flushing with anger. You have no right to. I have every right, I cut him off. Because I'm done being the background. I'm done being the one you left behind. I've spent my whole life fighting to prove I was worthy of a seat at the table, and now I know the truth. They were speechless. The power they once held over me was gone. But just as I thought I had them, my father made his critical mistake. He made the same mistake that had led to their downfall. He underestimated me. Do you think this will change anything? he sneered, his voice filled with contempt. You think these documents, these pathetic accusations will tear us down? You're nothing. Just like always. That was his fatal flaw. He couldn't help himself. His arrogance had always been his weakness, and now it was going to be his undoing. I'm not trying to tear you down, I said, standing up slowly. I'm just showing you the truth. And it's the truth that will tear you apart. I stood there for a moment, letting the words sink in. This wasn't about me being vindictive. This wasn't about me gaining revenge. This was about justice, about finally putting an end to the lie they had been living for so long. I walked out of their house that day feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. The plan was set in motion. Their mistakes were now their downfall. They had underestimated me for too long. And now there was no turning back. The days following my confrontation with my parents were a mixture of calm and anticipation. It felt surreal, like I was watching everything unfold from a distance. But deep down, I knew I had made my move. The seed of doubt had been planted, and now I had to let it grow, nurture it until it took root and everything around them began to crumble. I spent the next few days quietly, almost methodically, working behind the scenes. I didn't feel the need to rush. The truth was now in their hands, and I knew it would only be a matter of time before the consequences began to unfold. The pressure was building, slowly, like a storm gathering strength. And when it hit, it would hit hard. The first sign of change came when I saw my parents' business website had suddenly gone offline. The logo, once proudly displayed, was now missing. The clients they had worked with for years began pulling out, quietly and without explanation. There were no announcements, no grand declarations. It was all happening so subtly, so silently, that I almost didn't believe it at first. But I wasn't naive. I knew exactly what was happening. The foundation they had built on lies was cracking, and the truth was starting to show. I waited. I watched. The feeling of power I had longed for wasn't in the immediate satisfaction of a confrontation. It was in the slow, deliberate exposure of everything they had hidden. It wasn't long before the phone calls started coming. The first one was from one of their former business partners. His voice was thick with disbelief as he asked, "Evelyn, what's going on? I just heard that Carter Academic Strategies is being dropped by the Stratton Scholars Network. What did you do?" I didn't answer immediately. I could feel the weight of the question, but I wasn't going to give him what he wanted. Not yet. What happened is what always happens when people get too comfortable, I said coolly. They think they're untouchable until the truth comes knocking. There was a pause on the other end, then the voice finally spoke again, quieter now. Is this about your parents? Is it true they? Everything you heard is true, I interrupted, not waiting for him to finish. And more. Just wait. It won't be long before everyone finds out. I could hear the breath catch in his throat. The realization was dawning on him that my parents' carefully cultivated image was crumbling, and it was all because of their own greed. But it wasn't my job to explain it to him. It was their job to face the truth. As the days passed, the ripple effect continued. The phone calls increased. The emails started piling up. The news that my parents' business had been dismantled spread quickly, and I watched, detached, as their once powerful network turned against them. Former allies began backing out, withdrawing from contracts and reputation. The thing they had spent so long building was gone. Their business partners were now distancing themselves, afraid to be associated with the scandal. My father called me again a week later. His voice was no longer that cold, dismissive tone I had always known. Now it was tinged with fear and desperation. "Evelyn," he said, his voice shaky, "I need to talk to you. Please. This has gone too far. We didn't mean for this to happen." I let the silence hang between us for a moment, feeling a cold satisfaction wash over me. Finally I spoke. "You didn't mean for it to happen? Really? Because everything that's happening right now? It's exactly what you chose. You made this happen." He sighed, a long, defeated breath. "Please, we're not asking for much. Just help us out. We're losing everything." "You've already lost everything," I said, my voice steady. "What you had wasn't real. It was built on lies. And now the world's finding out who you really are." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear the weight of his realization. He had been too arrogant, too sure of himself. He had thought I would never fight back. But now there was nothing left to save him. I knew the final blow was coming. It wasn't going to be loud or dramatic. That wasn't the way I wanted it. I had already exposed their deception, their lies, their manipulations. But I wanted something more than just their downfall. I wanted them to feel the full weight of their actions. I wanted everyone to see who they truly were. That's when I decided it was time to send the final piece of evidence to the Stratton Scholars Network. I compiled everything: emails, texts, bank records, and official documents, all neatly organized, all irrefutable proof of the financial schemes, the false promises, and the lies my parents had told. I made sure to include everything. No detail was too small. Every piece of evidence was a thread in the web they had created, and now I was pulling it all apart. I addressed the email carefully, making sure not to leave any room for confusion. I included the same cold message I had sent earlier, but now with the full weight of evidence attached. Subject: the truth about the Carter family's business dealings. Dear Eleanor Stratton, I'm following up on our previous conversation and providing the complete details you need regarding the Carter family's deceitful business practices. As you'll see in the attached files, my parents have been involved in illegal activities for years, including money laundering, fraudulent financial reporting, and the misuse of funds intended for their daughter's future. This is not just about business. It's about the exploitation of trust and manipulation for personal gain. I trust that you will take the necessary steps to ensure that they are held accountable for their actions. Thank you for your time and attention to this matter. Best regards, Evelyn Carter. I hit send, and with it I knew the final chapter was being written. My parents' world had crumbled, and there was nothing left for them to salvage. I wasn't just watching their downfall, I had orchestrated it. It didn't take long for the consequences of my actions to begin rippling outward, like the aftermath of a powerful storm. Once I had sent that email to Eleanor Stratton, I knew it was only a matter of time before everything would fall apart. The truth was too much to ignore. My parents' empire was built on lies, and when the truth came to light, it was inevitable that it would shatter. The first sign that my plan was working came just a few days later. The Stratton Scholars Network, a name that had been synonymous with my parents' carefully cultivated image of success, publicly cut ties with them. The Foundation's official website, once adorned with my parents' glowing endorsements and testimonials, had quietly removed all traces of their involvement. It was as if they had never existed in the first place. I watched the news unfold from a distance. My parents tried to spin the situation, but the damage had been done. Press releases started to circulate, clients began pulling out of agreements, and one by one the connections they had relied on for years started to sever. The slow, methodical destruction of their reputation was far more painful than any immediate confrontation could have been. I didn't feel satisfaction. Not yet, anyway. What I felt was something colder, more methodical, a sense of justice. I had waited for this moment for so long, and now it was happening right before my eyes. A week later, the true scale of the damage became clear. My parents had tried to put up a facade of normalcy, going to meetings, attempting to salvage what was left of their business. But every attempt to rebuild was thwarted. The public humiliation had already begun. Their professional contacts were backing out in droves, and soon the clients they had worked with for years were turning their backs on them. The loss of credibility was irreparable. The companies that had once proudly displayed the Carter family name now wanted nothing to do with them. In the middle of it all, they came to me. They had no one else to turn to. They were desperate. I could hear the panic in their voices when they called, begging for help. Evelyn, my mother said on the phone, her voice shaking, we didn't mean for any of this to happen. We just didn't know how to fix it. Please, we need your help. I paused, letting her words hang in the air. The power I held in that moment was palpable. They were afraid, and for the first time in my life I felt like I was the one holding all the cards. Help? I repeated, my voice calm. Do you think this can be fixed, Mom? You think that a few words will erase what you've done? The years of lies, the years of manipulation. We didn't know what we were doing, she pleaded. We were just trying to make things work. We thought we were doing the right thing for Isabel, for the family. We never meant for you to be hurt. Stop, I interrupted her. You didn't just hurt me, you ruined everything. You thought you could get away with it. You thought I'd never find out. There was silence on the other end, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for them. But then I remembered what they had done, how they had discarded me, left me to fend for myself when I needed them the most. I'm not going to help you, I said, the words feeling like ice on my tongue. Not after everything you've done. The final blow came swiftly. The business, which had once been the cornerstone of their identity, was officially shut down. The remaining assets were seized, and the few clients left were in the process of pulling out completely. I didn't celebrate. I didn't revel in their failure. I wasn't looking for vengeance. I was simply watching the natural consequences of their actions unfold. It wasn't just the business that collapsed. Their lives were coming apart too. The mansion they had once called home, filled with luxuries they had earned through deceit, was sold off to pay off debts. The lifestyle they had flaunted so proudly was now just a distant memory. The public didn't need to know the full extent of their wrongdoing, it was already clear to everyone who mattered. They had been exposed for what they were, fraudulent, manipulative, and dishonest. But even as everything fell apart around them, they still couldn't bring themselves to admit their mistakes. They didn't apologize, not to me, not to anyone. They simply tried to rebuild their shattered image, to salvage whatever dignity they could, but the foundation they had built was now destroyed. Months passed before I saw them again. By then, the business had been fully liquidated, and they had moved into a smaller, much more modest home. They were no longer the figures of authority in the community. The friends they once bragged about were gone. The respect they once commanded had evaporated. They had become just another family that had tried to cheat the system, and had failed miserably. It was at a charity event, of all places, where I saw them for the first time since everything had fallen apart. My parents were attending, trying to make it seem as though their life was back on track. But it was clear from the way they looked, disheveled, embarrassed, that they were a shadow of their former selves. My mother approached me cautiously, as if she didn't know how to speak to me anymore. "Evelyn," she said, her voice small. "Please, we want to make things right. We know we've made mistakes and we're sorry. We didn't mean for everything to go the way it did." I didn't flinch. I didn't react. I simply stared at her for a moment, taking in the woman who had once been the source of so much pain, so much neglect. "You're sorry?" I repeated, my voice cold. "You had years to make things right and you never did. You chose Isabel, you chose your image over me, and now this is the result. You've lost everything you cared about. And it's not my job to save you." My father, standing beside her, opened his mouth to say something, but I didn't let him. I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving them standing there in the middle of a charity event, the once great Carter family reduced to nothing. The next day, their names were quietly removed from every prestigious list they had once been on. The few contracts that had lingered were terminated. No one even mentioned them anymore. They had been wiped from the public eye, and their failure had become a cautionary tale. As I walked through the door of my new life, I felt something shift within me. It wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't about hurting them. It was about moving forward. I had reclaimed my life, my truth, and everything that they had tried to take from me. They had wanted me to be invisible, but now I was the one in control. The months that followed felt like a slow, unfolding revelation. I had thought that once my parents faced the consequences of their actions, I would feel some sense of closure. But what I realized as I moved forward was that true peace comes not from the downfall of others, but from the power of reclaiming your own life. I didn't watch as my parents' business collapsed. I didn't pay attention to the final legal proceedings. I had already learned what I needed to, that I was stronger than the lies they had fed me, and I was far more than what they had ever made me believe. And most importantly, I had the truth. I spent a quiet period in my life focused on what mattered. Healing, moving forward, and building something for myself. The inheritance Grandpa had left me wasn't just a financial windfall, it was a new beginning. He had seen in me what I had never seen in myself, and now I was going to honor that by building a future that I could be proud of. I set up my life on my terms, living in a modest apartment in the city, far from the mansion that had once been my family's home. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need to fit into their world. I had found my own place, my own path, and I was learning to value myself for the first time in my life. Grandma Rosemary, as always, had been my anchor through it all. She had been my support, my calm, and my guide. Together we had walked through the pain, and together we were walking into a future where I no longer had to hide. "I'm so proud of you, Evelyn," she said one evening as we sat on her porch, sipping tea under the soft glow of the street lamp. "You've made it through so much and you've come out on top." I smiled at her, my heart full of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Grandma. You were the one who never gave up on me." She patted my hand, her eyes warm with love. "And you're the one who made it happen, Evelyn. You always had it in you. You just needed to see it." I took the time to reconnect with myself, something I had never truly done before. I started volunteering, helping kids who had grown up in difficult circumstances like mine, kids who had been told they weren't good enough, that they were invisible. I shared my story with them, not to gain sympathy, but to show them that their worth was not defined by anyone else's perception. And then, one day, I made the decision to do something else with Grandpa's legacy. I established a scholarship fund in his name, for children who had been overlooked, neglected, and rejected by those who should have cared for them. This was my way of ensuring that no one would ever have to suffer the way I had, of giving back and building a future that was rooted in truth and love. The foundation was small at first, but it grew steadily, helping more and more children each year. Every donation, every success story was a reminder of everything I had fought for. It wasn't just about taking back what was mine. It was about creating something lasting, something that would outlive my parents' lies. As the years went by, I found myself in a place of peace I had never imagined possible. My parents, despite all their efforts, had not destroyed me. They had thought they could break me, bend me, control me, but in the end they had underestimated me. I had built a life based on the truth, on my strength, and on my own terms. One night, as I sat in my small, cozy apartment, I thought back on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the lies, the pain. And I realized that it was all part of a journey that had led me to this moment, a moment where I could finally breathe, finally be free of the shadows they had cast over me. I had no need for their approval anymore. I no longer sought their validation. I didn't need them to see me. I saw myself, and that was all that mattered. A year later, on Grandpa's birthday, I stood by his grave, a bouquet of white lilies in my hand. I had made peace with him, with myself, and with the past. I hadn't forgotten the pain, but I had turned it into something greater. A legacy that wasn't built on deceit, but on truth and compassion. "I'm doing it, Grandpa," I whispered, placing the flowers down. "I'm building something real. Something that's mine." I stood there for a moment, letting the wind carry away the past, before I turned to walk away, knowing that the future was mine to shape. In the end, I didn't need their approval or their money. I had the truth, and that was more than enough. This story had come full circle. The past no longer defined me, and my future was finally in my hands. The lies that had once held me captive were gone, and I had emerged stronger than I had ever thought possible. I wasn't the background anymore. I wasn't the afterthought. I was the one in control.